Welcome to this candidates debate sponsored by the City Club of Portland. I am Andy Linehan, President-elect of the City Club. I especially want to thank United States candidate Bill Bradbury and representatives of his campaign and guests for being here today. We encourage you to join and become part of our organization. Before we begin the presentation, I have a few announcements. First, in just the past few months, City Club has published 5 ballot measure reports and has taken positions on 4 more based on former research. Today, we are hosting our 4th political debate of the season. All of these City Club efforts are important public services during this confusing election season. Your City Club has been providing this kind of public service for 86 years, and it takes funding from multiple sources to continue to do so. We are in the midst of our annual fund drive campaign for this year, and this year the annual fund drive is more important than ever in allowing us to continue our work. I encourage you all, members and guests, please take one of the orange cards on your table and make your pledge or gift today. If you want more information about the healthcare initiative on the November ballot, attend our New Leaders event on Monday, October 28th. It will feature the proponents and opponents of the measure, as well as Jay Formick, our City Club Ballot Measure Study Committee Chair, who will discuss our committee's rationale for the club position. This event will be at Kell's Pub from 6 to 7:30 p.m. on Monday the 28th. Beaverton voters will have the opportunity to indicate their preference for fluoridation on the November 5 ballot. Measure 34-57 asks the following question. Do Beaverton voters prefer to have domestic drinking water furnished by the city to be chemically fluoridated? I want to remind those of you who will be voting on this measure that the City Club of Portland has adopted a resolution in favor of fluoridation, and you can get further information on that decision on the City Club website. Now on to today's program. Today's debate will feature Mr. Bradbury alone. Candidate Gordon Smith was invited to participate in this debate, but he declined our invitation. The debate will have several sections. First, Mr. Bradbury will give a 3-minute opening statement. Following the opening statement, he will respond to questions from our City Club panel. Our questioners today are both members of the program committee, Nikki Lynch and Brian Redd, sitting in front here. Members of the club submitted questions in writing in advance of the meeting. Following questions from the panel, there will be questions from City Club members in the audience. If you have questions for Mr. Bradbury, please line up behind the microphone and ask your question in 30 seconds. Mr. Bradbury will have 90 seconds to respond to each question. We will end the program with Mr. Bradbury's 3-minute closing statement. Our timer seated in front today is Pat Roomer. This meeting is governed by the program format I've just described and the rules of conduct, which are displayed on all your tables. Please hold all applause until the end of the program, which will adjourn at about 1:15. I'm sure that most of you are familiar with the key points in Bill Bradbury's career. The fact that he represented the South Coast in the Oregon legislature for 14 years, that he was Senate Majority Leader from 1986 to 1993, and was Senate President from 1993 to 1995. You know that Mr. Bradbury was appointed Secretary of State by Governor Kitzhaber in November 1999 and elected to the office in 2000. However, I wonder how many of you know that early in his career, Mr. Bradbury produced a video documentary on the Miss California pageant that is now in the Museum of Modern Art in New York City, or that his nickname, given to him by Governor Kitzhaber, is the Big Chinook. Thank you, Mr. Bradbury.
I really want to say how much I appreciate being here today, and I think that this is a wonderful forum for the really complete consideration of a lot of issues. And I always enjoyed being called Big Chinook by John Kitzhaber. But before we begin today, I'm not sure if everyone is aware, but I want to acknowledge that there's been a very tragic plane crash in Minnesota. And I'm very sad to say that Senator Paul Wellstone, as well as his wife and his daughter, were on board and were killed in the crash. So our thoughts and our prayers are with the Wellstone family and with the families of all those that were on board the plane. I have to tell you that I personally admired Senator Paul Wellstone greatly, and I considered him not only to be a great leader in the United States Senate, but also a personal friend. He and I both struggle with multiple sclerosis, and his incredible spirit, his stamina, and his strength of character were a source of inspiration for me. And I have to tell you, I'm very, very saddened by this terrible news. Senator Wellstone's passing is really a great loss for Minnesota, and it is a great loss for the United States of America. And I know that his absence will be felt very deeply. A tragedy like this certainly overshadows politics, and I have to admit that it's hard for me to move forward. But it's important to carry on even as we mourn this loss. So I would ask that we just take a moment to acknowledge his passing with a moment of silence before we begin today's program. Please join me in a moment of silence. Thank you all so much. So I want to thank all of you for inviting me here this afternoon. The last time I had the opportunity to meet with the City Club, I was here as Oregon's Secretary of State to make the case for election reform. And that was after the 2000 fiasco that took place in Florida. Today I'm wearing a slightly different hat, but the hat I'm wearing is I'm here as Oregon's Democratic nominee for the United States Senate. But no matter what hat I'm wearing, I always enjoy the chance to meet with and talk with the City Club. This is truly Oregon's preeminent policy discussion group, and I appreciate the chance to talk with you today about this Senate race and the issues that are most important to Oregonians. I'm running for the United States Senate because I believe that Oregonians deserve a senator who will put their views and their interests first. I'm disappointed that Senator Smith declined to participate in today's debate because I believe very, very strongly that voters deserve an opportunity to hear where we stand on the issues and really get to make a judgment about who will best represent them in Washington, D.C. Now, in over 20 years of public service, I have clearly proven that you can trust me to put Oregonians first. As Secretary of State, the state's top fiscal watchdog, I've conducted over 100 performance audits of state agencies, identifying millions of dollars in savings and eliminating waste. In the U.S. Senate, I have a plan to create 50,000 new jobs in Oregon, and I have a proposal that will lower the skyrocketing cost of prescription drugs. I'll push for laws to protect Oregonians' pensions from corporate fraud. I'll protect Social Security and Medicare, and I'll continue my lifelong advocacy for the rights of gays and lesbians in this society. I'll defend a woman's right to choose to make her own reproductive health decisions, and I'll protect, not spoil, Oregon's treasured environment. The bottom line is that for 6 years, Gordon Smith has put his personal priorities first. But as your next U.S. Senator, I will be accountable to you.
We will now move to the debate portion of the program, which consists of questions from our panel. I will turn the program over to our panelists, Nikki Lynch and Brian Redd. Following each question, Mr. Bradbury will have 90 seconds to respond. The First question will come from Nikki Lynch.
Both the U.S. Senate and the House of Representatives are holding hearings on the increasing practice of U.S. companies to reincorporate outside the United States to substantially reduce or eliminate their corporate taxes. What is your view of this practice, and what, if anything, do you advocate the U.S. government should do in response?
Well, pardon me for a minute while I sit down on my chair, and I'll answer questions as soon as I sit down. I feel very, very strongly that we need to work hard to make it impossible for companies to reincorporate in places like Bermuda to avoid the taxation that they owe United States citizens. It's critically important that we receive support for the government from all the taxpayers. That includes all of us as citizens. It includes the corporations as well. And my impression is that there are things that we can do to prevent this easy using of a Bermuda residence as your tax address. And my impression is that we can hold those corporations accountable to pay their fair share of taxes here in the United States. I think we have a very interesting contrast between me and Senator Gordon Smith on the issue of taxes. Gordon Smith has voted for a $1.3 trillion tax cut that goes primarily to the wealthy and to large corporations and does not benefit average Oregonians. And I think we need to make sure that our fiscal policies don't lead to deficit spending that spends Social Security, that spends Medicare, and instead what we're doing is, because of Gordon Smith's vote, we're letting large corporations and individuals not pay taxes.
Mr. Bradbury, the U.S. Park Service now tells visitors to Glacier National Park in Montana that in 20 to 25 years, the park will be completely devoid of its many glaciers due to the melting caused by global warming. Earlier this year, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency issued a report confirming that our burning of fossil fuels is a cause of this global warming. What should the U.S. government do to address this problem?
The first thing the United States government should do is recognize that the United States of America is one of the largest polluters and causers of global warming around the globe. And we should recognize our responsibility in relation to the larger global community to address that problem. Things like the Kyoto Treaty are not treaties that we should walk away from. We should work hard to see that all of us do everything we can to reduce greenhouse gas production. And I think it's really appalling, the record of the current administration on our role in the world. The current administration has basically said that we're just going to go this on our own. We don't really need to be part of a global community. We don't really need to work to lower greenhouse gases because we don't really think there's a problem. And I think that's incredibly irresponsible. I think we know there's a problem with greenhouse gases. We know we need to be responsible members of the global community. And that's what I would support, is keeping the United States as a responsible member of the global community.
Mr. Bradbury, last year the U.S. had an $83 billion trade deficit in goods with China, the largest of any country with whom we trade, and 20% greater than our deficit with Japan, the next largest. It appears that this year's deficit will be even greater. China's manufacturing and exporting capacity is growing rapidly, foretelling an even greater amount of imports from China. What, if anything, should the United States government do about this growing trade imbalance?
I think that I start on this issue from the standpoint that we all recognize, or most of us recognize anyway, that free global trade is really going to be the future, and it's a critical part of trade today. But as we move to freer global trade, we need to make sure that it's fair trade. In other words, we don't let people import things here when they don't let us import things there. That's number one. Number two, we need to make sure that International Labor Organization standards are reflected in trade agreements, and we need to make sure that environmental protections are reflected in trade agreements so that we don't have situations like the one that exists right now where a Canadian corporation is using the World Trade Organization to try to overturn a statute that the voters in California enacted, limiting the amount of, I think it's called MTBE additives in gasoline. California voters said, we don't want those additives in our gasoline. And there's a corporation in Canada that's attacking that limitation, saying it's a restraint of trade. That's not a restraint of trade. That's people protecting themselves. And we need to make sure that we all as citizens maintain the right to protect ourselves environmentally, but also we need to understand that we've got to provide for global trade, because that, I believe, is really the future.
In this year's annual report, Warren Buffett, chairman of Berkshire Hathaway Incorporated, said he was, quote, disgusted by the situation so common in the last few years in which shareholders have suffered billions in losses while the CEOs, promoters, and other higher-ups who fathered these disasters have walked away with extraordinary wealth. To their shame, these business leaders view shareholders as patsies, not partners, close quote. Has the U.S. government done enough to give investors reasonable confidence that they will not be treated like patsies? If not, what more should be done?
The U.S. government has taken a good first step with the legislation that was enacted right before the end of Congress that related to accounting standards. That was a good first step, but we've got to go much further. I met with a number of employees of PGE, Portland General Electric, which, as I think most of you know, is a wholly owned subsidiary of Enron. And the employees there, people who go out and work on the lines, linemen, basically came and met with me and talked about how their 401ks had declined. The three of them's 401ks had declined by $1.3 million. And that was because of corporate management. They didn't allow the employees to sell their stock when the stock started to plummet because they used a provision in the standards that allows you to freeze activity by employees for a month at a time while you're quote-unquote changing plan administrators. So we've got to have greater accountability of corporations, and that means that we've got to make sure that employees' investments and retirements are protected. That means that we need to enact better standards to get really honest accounting of publicly traded companies. And my proposal would be that we have every publicly traded company pay fees to the Securities and Exchange Commission, and then they would then do the accounting, which separates it from abuse by people, companies, and accountants working too closely together. Sorry I ran over there.
In his New York Times best-selling book, Wealth and Democracy, longtime Republican activist and advisor Kevin Phillips cautions that the increased influence that big money is having on legislation and government decision-making threatens our democracy. Similarly, Senator John McCain has decried the elaborate influence peddling scheme in which both parties conspire to stay in office by selling the country to the highest bidder. Do you share their concern? And if so, what should be done to alter this trend?
I very much share their concern, and I am a strong supporter of the McCain-Feingold campaign finance reform measure, which passed the Congress. It passed the Congress with Gordon Smith voting no on the McCain-Feingold bill. He apparently thinks that it's just great the way we currently finance our campaigns. I don't agree with him. And I think it's been remarkable to watch this campaign because he has spent millions of dollars on television basically distorting my record And there's a whole series of things he doesn't want to talk about in his television ads. He talks about all the taxes I raised, but he doesn't talk about the 74 times I lowered taxes while I served in the state legislature, whether it be lowering taxes for low-income property owners or whether it be lowering taxes for making sure that Social Security wasn't subject to taxation. Those are things I did in the legislature, and I'm sure that Gordon Smith doesn't want to talk to you about the 81 times he voted to raise taxes in the United States Senate. He doesn't talk about that, and it was $150 billion in increased revenue that Gordon Smith voted for that he never wants to talk about. He likes to present himself as someone who protects the taxpayer, but what he does is vote for a $1.3 trillion tax cut that gives significant benefits to those who own over $350,000, have over $350,000 of income, but that's who he represents, and I think it's a very sad case.
Mr. Bradbury, in April 1993, President Clinton convened a forest conference in Portland to resolve the bitter conflict regarding the federal forest in the Spotted Owl region of the Pacific Northwest and Northern California. The outcome of that conference was the Northwest Forest Plan, covering 22 million acres of federal forest, which was designed, among other things, to produce a predictable and environmentally sustainable supply of timber. Many in the forest products sector in Oregon are frustrated by the plan's failure to deliver on its promise of a predictable supply of timber. What is your perspective on this issue?
You know, I represented for 15 years the southern Oregon coast of Oregon. And anyone here who knows the southern Oregon coast knows it is a timber-dependent, fishery-dependent, agriculture-dependent, and tourist-dependent area. So I watched as many, many timber workers worked hard, played by the rules, raised their kids, and all of a sudden found themselves out of work because of unsustainable management practices. Best example was Georgia Pacific, that owned about 500,000 acres near Coos Bay, used to be owned by the Coos Bay Lumber Company, would have provided jobs for 1,000 people permanently. But Georgia Pacific decided to liquidate that 500,000 acres in 8 years. And they did so, and all the people who live in small towns like Powers were just left hanging. And I watched that, and I said, we've got to manage our resources in a sustainable way to provide those resources for ourselves, our kids' kids, on down the line 7 generations. So I'm very committed to sustainable use of our resources, and I'm sure that there are adjustments needed in the President's forest plan, in the Northwest Forest Plan, to make sure that we bring the harvest closer to the level that was the target. And I would be supportive of that, and I think we need to do it in a sustainable manner.
In May of this year, the U.S. Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms issued a report in which it concluded that current technology could reliably be used to match a bullet or shell casing with a database of bore images from gun barrels. In response to the recent sniper attacks, some are calling for a national system to record the bore images of guns sold in the United States. Do you feel such a system would violate the Second Amendment to the U.S. Constitution?
I don't think that a system that fingerprints a gun violates the Second Amendment of the Constitution. I represented an area on the South Coast where we had a whole lot of people who own guns and do a lot of hunting, and I support their very responsible use of those firearms. But I think we need to do some things to enact basically gun safety. And one of the things we need to do is close the gun show loophole. Oregon has closed the gun show loophole. Almost 2/3 of the people in this state voted. I think they surprised a lot of people around the country. They voted to close the gun show loophole. Now, I support that. I think it's very sensible to make sure that people buying guns at gun shows are subject to the same background checks as people at gun dealers. My opponent, Gordon Smith, has voted repeatedly against closing the gun show loophole nationally. Now, I think it's critically important that we close the gun show loophole nationally, because it's very easy if you live in Portland to go right across the river into Vancouver and not be subject to a closed gun show loophole. So we need to enact a national closure, and I'm supportive of that, and Gordon Smith has not voted in favor of closing the gun show loophole nationally.
Mr. Bradbury, the United States is selling nuclear power reactors to North Korea, which has recently admitted that it is developing nuclear weapons, while at the same time we are pressuring Russia to halt its sale of nuclear power reactors to Iraq, which we suspect is developing nuclear weapons. Do you view those as consistent or inconsistent policies? And how should we deal with North Korea now that it has admitted its nuclear weapons program?
Well, let me answer your first question first. I don't see those as consistent at all. I think that we need to be aware that let me answer this question this way, that all of us suffered incredibly when we watched the World Trade Center crumble, basically at the hands of terrorists, and many thousands of people die. And we've engaged in a very significant effort at a war on terrorism. And we've got over 100 countries involved in that war on terrorism. They're all sharing information with us. I believe very strongly that we destroy the cooperation we get with the war on terrorism if we preemptively, unilaterally attack Iraq. And I would vote no on the resolution that was just before the Congress, just like Ron Wyden, Peter DeFazio, Darlene Hooley, David Wu, and Earl Blumenauer. They all agree with me that it doesn't make sense to unilaterally, preemptively attack Iraq. What makes sense is to keep Saddam Hussein accountable, because he's a ruthless dictator, but it doesn't make sense to destroy our ability to effectively wage the war on terrorism. And so that's how I would approach it, is to basically make sure that we're effectively dealing with the war on terrorism first.
This will be the last question.
Okay.
Every elected official at some point is faced with a dilemma when their personal views differ from the clear majority of their constituents. This dilemma is particularly acute with U.S. senators who each represent all the voters of their state. How would you reconcile such differences when faced with an important vote in the Senate?
Well, I think that I totally respect people having strong principles. I am a person of strong principle, and I totally respect that. I feel that my job as a United States Senator is to respect how the voters of Oregon have acted when they enact a law. And the best example of that is death with dignity, which Oregon voters enacted first time with 50.5% of the vote. Then the Republican legislature re-referred it to the voters, and 2/3 of Oregon voters said, no, this is the law we want. We want death with dignity. Now, we got a very fundamental difference between our two senators, Ron Wyden and Gordon Smith, on how they've responded to the enactment of death with dignity. Neither of them supported death with dignity. Ron Wyden has said over and over he never voted for it. But how did he respond when people were trying to overturn the will of Oregon voters by bringing legislation to the floor of the Senate? He said, if you try to overturn the will of Oregon voters, I will filibuster. That's one approach. That's the approach that I believe is the appropriate approach. The other approach is the one that Gordon Smith has taken, which is to say, I agree with overturning the will of Oregon voters, and I think it's great that John Ashcroft is suing the people of Oregon to try to overturn our will. So you got a very clear choice between two very different approaches to how you deal with principle.
During this next portion of the program, City Club members may ask questions of Mr. Bradbury. Please line up behind the microphone and over there in the audience. Identify yourself as a City Club member and ask your question in 30 seconds. Remember that this is a time for questions, not statements. I have the traditional City Club prop with me to remind you if necessary. Mr. Bradbury will have 90 seconds to respond to your questions. Our timer, Pat Rumor, will continue to time during this portion of the program. Thank you.
I am Oliver Massengale. I am a City Club member. I'm also a physician that's practiced medicine in Portland for 35 years. With all due respect to you, Mr. Secretary, you have a chronic and incurable disease. The progression of this disease is quite unpredictable. Some people feel that individuals who are exposed to a lot of stress are more likely to deteriorate. It would seem to me that service in the United States Senate would be very stressful. What assurance can you give me, sir, that if elected, you will be able to represent the people of this state in an active and effective manner for the next 6 years?
That's an excellent question, and I really appreciate your asking it. I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis in 1981, so that's 22, 23 years ago that I was diagnosed with that. Since I was diagnosed, I've served as a state representative, I've served as a state senator, I've served as the Senate Majority Leader, I've served as the Senate President, and I now serve as the Secretary of State. I have to tell you that efforts like running for Secretary of State and running for the United States Senate totally energize me. And I have learned how to manage my disability such that it doesn't interfere with my ability to represent the people of Oregon. And sitting on this chair is a great example. I'm sitting on a chair. Why am I sitting on a chair? I'm sitting on this chair because I have multiple sclerosis, and if I don't sit on this chair, I'll limp away from this debate. I don't want to limp. I want to take care of myself. I've learned to do that, and I have to tell you that challenges energize me and make me much stronger and more effective and really reduce the symptoms. I traveled around the state at the end of the Secretary of State's campaign, visited 35 locations in 3 days. I was feeling better when I came away from that than I did when I started, because I'm energized by this kind of effort. So I appreciate your question.
Hello, my name is Bill Parrish, a City Club member.
Hi.
I met your opponent, Gordon Smith, a couple times here at City Club events, and I've also corresponded with his staff several times. About a year before Enron collapsed, I was trying to get him interested in some of these accounting issues and these financial fraud-related things. And the thing I specifically mentioned to him was with respect to the Microsoft Corporation. My question is this. Gordon Smith's strongest lobby is Citizens for a Sound Economy. They're backed by Microsoft. Microsoft's one of his biggest opponents. They're the biggest provider of soft money contributions. You don't know that, but they are. If he's truly the senator from Microsoft now, what would you do differently?
Well, I don't know if I can speak to Microsoft specifically, but I can speak to keeping corporations accountable. And I'm very committed to making sure that we keep corporations accountable, that we keep CEOs accountable. I mean, we've had some amazing situations recently where CEOs have basically thumbed their nose at the law. That's not okay. They need to go to jail. It's real simple. But we also need to enact significant reforms in how we do accounting so that all of us can trust in the accounting information we receive, and because we all depend on it. I presume everyone here probably owns some stock. I certainly do. I want to know what's going on. And it's not okay that basically we're violating the essence of the free market system if we don't have the same information that certain CEOs do. That's not okay. So we've got to make sure that accounting is clear and that we all get the same kind of information to make those decisions. The other thing is, it's amazing to me, like the employees I met with from PGE Enron. I mean, here they are, they're 55 years old, they're linemen, and they've just been told, oh, just start over. Oh, sure. I mean, they're getting real tired of climbing phone poles now, and they're being told to start over. That's not right. That's not the system we all believe in, and I think we need to keep it accountable.
Hi, I'm Susan Pierce, member and also hospice, home health, and home infusion nurse. So this question is near and dear to my heart. Please tell us more about your plans to control the cost of prescription meds for seniors and for the rest of us, and any other plans for controlling costs of medical care?
I had an amazing experience about 6 months ago. Took a bus trip to Canada and went with about 20 senior citizens. And I had sitting right next to me a woman named Trudy, who gets about $800 a month in Social Security, and she spends $500 of those $800 on prescription medications. Now, those prescription medications are miraculous. They keep her in great shape. They maintain her health care, but it's really very troubling that she's spending $500 or $800 on prescription drugs. We go to Canada, we cross the border, we get a prescription, we take an American prescription in and get it written in Canadian by a Canadian doctor, take it to the pharmacy, and buy the same medications for $250. So $500 in America, $250 in Canada. So we clearly need to do some things to control the cost of prescription drugs. Now, my opponent has gotten over $100,000 from the pharmaceutical industry in this campaign. I'm happy to say I haven't gotten a dime. And what we've got to do is control the cost of prescription drugs, and there's a whole series of things we can do to do that, like pooling, purchasing, and the like. And then we need to provide a comprehensive Medicare-based prescription drug benefit to all the citizens in this state that are 65 and over.
Whitney Pates, City Club member. Gordon Smith seems to have persuaded Matthew Shepard's mother that she's a very nice guy. Well, Gordon may well be a nice guy, but I have a question. Is this an election year conversion, or has Gordon been keeping quiet about some of his views until now? And do you happen to know whether or not he showed that same ad in Southern Oregon, Eastern Oregon, as he's been showing here, this one in which Mr. Shepard praises him?
Well, let me first say that no, this issue on gay rights and on hate crimes is not an election year conversion. It is a conversion for Gordon Smith, but it's not an election year conversion. I think credit needs to go where credit's due. And the fact is that Gordon Smith is basically the only Republican who basically thinks that we should enact hate crimes legislation that includes sexual orientation. He also thinks we should pass legislation, and as do I, that provides for employment non-discrimination. In other words, a guarantee that you won't be discriminated against in your place of employment based on sexual orientation. I think those are wonderful positions that he's taken. The problem is that that's about as far as he goes. And there are a lot of other issues that the gay and lesbian community cares about. And I have been an absolutely strong and clear spokesperson or advocate for the gay and lesbian community since I was first elected to the Oregon legislature. I've opposed every ballot measure that was aimed at taking away their rights. Gordon Smith hasn't said a word about any of them. I think there are some fundamental differences, and I really appreciate having the endorsement of Basic Rights Oregon, which is the group that is the grassroots group that deals with gay and lesbian issues. And I feel their support is very meaningful in this race.
Thank you.
Carol Witherell, City Club member.
Hi.
Hi. Thank you for coming. Education and human services are in something of what I would call systemic crisis in our state and around the country due to inadequate resources. Solutions that involve romancing the past or making all too lean resources even more competitive, or blaming any one group, such as educators or specific communities, are not productive. What would be? How can we get education back to where it needs to be if it is indeed the crucible of a healthy democracy?
I'm going to give you an answer that's based on my experience. I have two daughters, both of whom I'm very proud of, who attended public schools in Oregon and learned well enough for one to graduate from Middlebury College in Vermont and the other to graduate from Stanford University in California. And I come at this having the endorsement of all the teachers in Oregon. I come at this having the endorsement of other educational professionals in Oregon. And I think it is critically important that the federal government start being a good partner in terms of education. They have imposed mandate after requirement on local school boards and local school districts. And some of them are great, like the program that provides for disabled education. It's a wonderful program called Special Ed, but it costs a lot. And the federal government said they'd pay 40% of the cost of that program, and the most they've ever paid in Oregon is 9% of the cost. And if they paid just what they said they'd pay, it would be $250 million more for Oregon schools every 2 years. Now, I think all of us would agree that Oregon needs $250 million more for our schools from the federal government. And that's what we need to do, is keep the federal government accountable for the requirements they've imposed, for the requirements they've made on education in this state.
Thank you.
Guinevere Milius, City Club member. First of all, I wanted to thank you for coming. I can't tell you how disappointed I am that your opponent couldn't see to it to be here today. My question, I'd like to actually return to a question that was asked of you from the panel. I wanted to give you an opportunity to respond specifically to whether or not you support gun fingerprinting. The gun show loophole aside, whether or not you support fingerprinting of guns and bullets, either yes, no, or you're not sure yet, but I'd like to give you the opportunity to respond to that question specifically.
I think it sounds like a very good idea, especially given the situation we just had with the sniper near Washington, D.C., which terrorized people in Virginia, Maryland, and District of Columbia for 3-4 weeks. I think it'd be a very good idea. And I think there are a number of other gun safety ideas that make a whole lot of sense, like child safety locks that don't interfere with people's right to own guns. They just make it possible for kids not to blow their heads off. What a concept. So, I mean, it's like we have to get past this incredibly divisive, either give me I got the right to own my gun, or, you know, I'm not interested in taking away people's guns. I'm not interested in that. But I'm interested in sensible, common sense gun safety legislation that protects our kids, protects our citizens, and enables people to continue to operate under the Second Amendment.
Ruth Curry, City Club member. 2 quick questions. One, I understand there's a movement by the administration to push for continued funding, continuing the tax cut. And then the second question is, I don't think that they're going to vote on going to Iraq by the time that after they return on November 12th. So that'll be in January, and I hope that you'll be elected. And what would your stand, since everybody but every country except England is opposing what the administration wants to do?
Well, let me answer the second question first, which is, I'll just restate that I would have voted against the resolution that moved through Congress that gave the president the authority to preemptively, unilaterally attack Iraq. I do not think that is a responsible position for this country to take. Now, the other question, I think, related to the incredible $1.3 trillion tax cut and whether I would vote to make it permanent, and the answer is absolutely not. I think that we need to be sure that we're not driving our government further into deficit spending with tax cuts. And I think it's irresponsible to get the federal government into the position where what we're doing is deficit spending today to the tune of $200 billion a year, and all of that money comes from Social Security and Medicare trust funds. And what we're doing is giving IOUs to Social Security and Medicare and giving huge tax breaks to the ultra wealthy and big corporations. I don't think that's a sensible approach to good public policy. Hi, Wayne.
Hey, Wayne Lay, City Club member. Just two questions about the economy. You mentioned 50,000 jobs for Oregon. Could you elaborate how you would deliver on that in some a little bit more detail?
Yes.
And your views of how business-friendly the state is right now for helping develop more economic base here for jobs and for growth.
I have a plan that would create 50,000 new jobs in Oregon over the next period of time. And basically, there's both a short-term aspect to it and a long-term aspect. Short-term, we need to increase our investment in roads, our investment in bridges, our investment in mass transit. That puts people to work right away. It's classic public works. Put people to work doing something that helps the state. And having good roads, having good bridges. We've got all these bridges in Oregon that are weight limited. So we can do something right away that helps the economy right away. We also need to look at the needs of the high-tech community, the needs of the timber industry, the needs of agriculture, and look at some longer-term investments in those industries. Best example is the high-tech community has said they want a Tier 1 engineering school located in Oregon. I would take it as a major effort and a major challenge to have the federal government help make that happen. We also have an incredible opportunity in the state with what I call green technology, whether it be renewable energy or whether it be environmental cleanup technology. Oregon is really a leader in producing having those kind of companies that produce that kind of technology. And if we provide some federal assistance to those industries, we get a cleaner environment worldwide, and we get people to work right here in Oregon. Sounds good to me.
I'm Tom Dunn, City Club member. Many years ago, General Eisenhower, on departing from office, President Eisenhower too, warned us against a growing military-industrial complex and the kind of problems that could have for our republic. I see myself that problem hasn't gone away. What do you think?
Well, I agree with you that it certainly hasn't gone away. One thing is that it was very interesting to me that George Bush proposed a dramatic increase in spending on the missile defense system as part of his war on terrorism. And I haven't met any terrorists yet who have missiles that we have to build a multi-billion-dollar system to defend ourselves against. Here's what's so interesting to me is Wesley Clark, General Wesley Clark, who is the Allied commander or was the Allied commander in Europe, said that if you want to supercharge recruiting for Al-Qaeda, attack Iraq preemptively and unilaterally. And that's what I believe. We have a significant challenge in front of us that was shown to us by the World Trade Center. And we have a significant challenge to overcome or win this war on terrorism. And you don't win the war on terrorism by unilaterally, preemptively attacking Iraq. And that's what's being talked about. I think what we should be talking about is how do we keep the world safe? How do we keep this country safe? How do we keep our citizens safe from terrorism? And how can we work together effectively with other people around the globe to do that?
Today we've had, Kurt Wabring, a member, today we've had a number of questions about corporate management. And I have a question for you that I'm not sure has a legislative resolution, but I'd be interested in your views. An average senior executive in Japan gets about 17 times more than the average worker. Germany, 22. U.S. 25 years ago, about 40. Currently, it's about 400 to 450. I'm wondering what your perspective on that kind of executive compensation is.
Well, let me first answer by saying that I think it's critically important that we keep corporations and CEOs accountable that they follow the law. Second, I really don't think it's appropriate for the government to be getting involved in the compensation levels of CEOs. That's really up to the stockholders of that company. That's really up to the directors of that company. And I'm sorry, but God forbid if the government starts setting compensation levels at private corporations. I just don't think that that's where we need to go. But we do need to go to keeping the people who are serving in the jobs that are getting paid well. We've got to keep them accountable. And I've talked about a number of things that need to be done to keep CEOs and keep corporations accountable so that all of us can depend on the free enterprise system.
Mr. Bradbury, Brian Red, City Club. The Congressional Budget Office's current budget forecasts show a return to budget deficits at least until the year 2010, with the deficits reaching as high as $315 billion, a level not seen since 1992. This projection does not include the cost of our military action in Iraq or the cost of our occupation and reconstruction after the combat, estimated to be in the hundreds of billions of dollars. Are these projected deficits and perhaps much greater deficits due to our activities in Iraq acceptable? And if not, what alternatives would you propose?
Well, I think you do a good job of detailing the kinds of challenges we face with increasing deficits at the federal level. I think that the government's first priority is to keep the citizens of this country safe. And I think we do that. We fight wars like World War II. We fought that war, and I'm sure we deficit spent quite a bit. So that's appropriate. But I don't think what's appropriate is enacting a $1.3 trillion tax cut that increases the deficit, and we're looking at fiscal mismanagement that affects Social Security and Medicare, affects the future of those programs, and it doesn't really make sense to proceed on all kinds of spending programs and military actions unless they're necessary to protect American citizens, at which point I think we have an obligation. I take an oath of office as a United States Senator to defend the Constitution from all enemies, domestic and foreign. And I take that very seriously, and I think you have to do that. But we need to be very smart about how we approach that challenge. And like I said, I don't think the way to approach that challenge is to preemptively, unilaterally attack Iraq like my opponent does.
I'm Roberta Palmer, City Club member. Our healthcare system is basically collapsing. Our premiums are unaffordable, and more people are uninsured and underinsured. Incremental reforms have not worked, and I wonder if you would support a national health plan such as a single-payer system?
I think that I was very inspired yesterday by Governor Howard Dean from Vermont, who was here, and was talking about provisions that we need to enact to get health care to all of our citizens. And I thought he had some excellent ideas that basically recognize that there are a whole series of interest groups out there that have various specific interests, and he was finding a way to provide coverage to our citizens but dodge a lot of the opposition. And I think it was basically a proposal based on a commitment for this country to provide coverage to all of our citizens for health care. Because I think all of us know that we're the only industrialized country that doesn't provide health care to its citizens. And we've got over 40 million people who are uninsured. So we need to do everything we can to improve access to health care and make sure that coverage is expanded. And I was very encouraged meeting with Senator Wyden, meeting with Governor Dean about some things that could be done that were in fact very achievable to provide that health care to all of our citizens. So I'm very supportive of those kinds of efforts.
Good afternoon.
Good
Chris
afternoon.
Kane, City Club member. You talked a little bit about public education earlier, and I just wanted to return to that topic because given the recent activist role that the federal government has taken in public education, could you talk a little bit about the differences between your views on that role and your opponents?
Yeah. Let's start with the tax cut that was enacted, the $1.3 trillion tax cut that Gordon Smith voted for, that Ron Wyden voted against, that Bill Bradbury would have voted against. That basically, there was a choice given to the Senate. There was a choice that said, should we increase funding for education and slightly decrease the tax cut for the upper 1%? And Ron Wyden and 51 other senators voted yes, we should decrease slightly the tax cut to fund education. Gordon Smith voted no. Gordon Smith has voted against almost every proposal that has come before the United States Senate to reduce class size, to hire more teachers, to increase the use of technology in our schools, and to have our school facilities be in good shape. He's voted no. I would vote yes because I believe we've got to keep the federal government accountable for the promises and the commitments it's made to support public education. I don't think you solve the problem of public education by simply mandating no child left untested, which is where we are today. I think testing is fine, but we've got to educate our kids and then test them, not just test them without education behind it.
If there are no further questions from the audience, we'll now move to the final portion of our program, which is a 3-minute closing statement from Mr. Bradbury.
So I really want to thank the City Club, and I want to thank the people listening on Oregon Public Broadcasting at home for this opportunity to talk with you about this U.S. Senate race. I'm running for the U.S. Senate because I believe that Oregonians deserve a senator who will put their views and their interests first, while Gordon Smith has consistently put his own priorities first and works against the interests of Oregonians. So when you mail in your ballot, I would ask you to keep the following issues in mind. While Gordon Smith puts his own views first in overturning Oregon's death with dignity, I stand with you. While Gordon Smith puts his own views first in opposing a woman's right to choose, I stand with you. And while Gordon Smith represents his own interests when it comes to the environment, I stand with you. I have a plan to create 50,000 new jobs for our economy, and you can entrust me to protect Social Security from privatization. I really do think that it's a shame that Senator Smith isn't here today, because I believe Oregonians deserve the chance to hear from both of us about where we stand on the issues. And although I thoroughly enjoyed our KGW debate here in Portland and our debate in Medford, I just don't think that 2 debates are enough with this range of issues. But I'm sorry that Senator Smith doesn't share that view. His campaign strategy appears to rely on a barrage of negative ads rather than a meaningful dialogue about the issues that matter to Oregonians, such as how we can bring new jobs to Oregon to improve our economy, lower the rising costs of health care, and ensure that our children have clean water to drink and clean air to breathe. You deserve to know where each of us stand on these important issues based on our records, not the distortions my opponent has offered on television. The Medford Mail Tribune called Gordon Smith's TV campaign, and I quote, disingenuous at best and dishonest at worst. And frankly, I couldn't agree more. To see the truth about my record, I'd invite you to visit my website at bradbury2002.com. And I want to pledge to you today that if I'm elected, I promise to come back to the City Club once a year, and I promise that I will never turn down a debate here. Yes, Gordon. Yes, Gordon can spend all the money he wants in this campaign, and for watching TV, I guess he's spent quite a bit. But what he can't change are the facts. And for 6 years, Gordon Smith has put his own personal views first, but as your next United States Senator, I will be accountable to you, and I'd very much appreciate your vote for United States Senate. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bradbury. We really do appreciate your being here. Thank you for coming. Thank you, our panelists, and thank you, our timer. We're adjourned.